When I bought my house, I didn't want trouble. I wanted peace and quiet, just a place to breathe after years working cases that took me across the country. I'm a U.S. Marshal, 20 years in the service, and trust me, I've seen some wild things, but nothing prepared me for Karen. She didn't look like trouble at first, middle-aged, pushed together, always wearing this tight blazer like she was going to court, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, the kind of woman who'd call the police if your mailbox was off-center. I moved in on a Wednesday. By Friday morning, there was a bright yellow notice on my door. Welcome to the Ridgewood community. Per HOA regulations, all new homeowners must submit landscaping plans within 10 business days to avoid citation. I stared at it for a second, then at my lawn, trimmed, edged, not a leaf in sight. Landscaping plans. This wasn't an apartment complex. This was a single-family home on a private lot. I wasn't part of any HOA. I had checked before signing the deed, so I tossed the notice in the trash. That weekend, I was pressure washing my driveway when Karen showed up. She didn't knock. She just stood there on the edge of my property, arms folded, watching me like I was committing a crime. When I finally shut off the machine and turned around, she stepped forward. "Hi there," she said. "Karen Whitmore. I'm the president of the Ridgewood HOA." I didn't shake her hand. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said flatly. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All properties in this zone fall under the Ridgewood HOA. You may have missed the clause." I didn't miss anything. My realtor made it very clear this lot is grandfathered out. It was never annexed. Karen blinked, then smiled tighter. "We'll see about that. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you'd submit your compliance documents. We're trying to maintain a certain standard here." I didn't say a word. I just picked up the pressure washer and turned it back on. She got the hint. The next few days, the letters got worse. A fine for failure to submit a driveway cleaning schedule, $150. Another one for an unauthorized security camera, $200. And then one accusing me of noise violations due to excessive garage activity. I'd spent the afternoon organizing tools. That was it. Each letter came stamped with Ridgewood HOA enforcement. Same logo, same typeface, but no legal references, no signatures from a municipal officer. It was all smoke and mirrors, and I wasn't about to play along. That Friday night, I came home from work and found a white SUV parked half on my lawn. Two men stood near the hood, matching polo shirts, dark cargo pants, radios clipped to their belts. One of them wore a cheap, plastic-looking badge. I pulled into the driveway and stepped out slow, watching. "Evening," the taller one said. "We're with Ridgewood HOA enforcement." I tilted my head. "You boys carry a warrant," he shifted. "We're here for a compliance check." I smiled a little. "Oh good, I love compliance. Let me grab something real quick." I walked into the house, straight to the safe, unlocked it, pulled out my badge, the real one. When I came back out, both of them were already peeking through the side gate. "Step away from my property," I said, voice even. Now, they turned. "Sir, we've had multiple complaints." "You're in violation of..." I cut him off by holding up my badge. U.S. Marshal, chrome-plated, issued straight from the Department of Justice. They stopped talking instantly. "You just attempted to inspect the property of a federal officer without a warrant," I said. "That's impersonation and trespassing. Want to explain yourselves?" The shorter guy actually backed up. The taller one swallowed hard. "We were just doing our job." "No, you weren't," I said. "You were doing Karen's dirty work. And now you're going to tell me exactly who hired you." They didn't speak, just got in the SUV and drove off. The next morning, I had my lawyer send a cease and desist letter to the so-called Ridgewood HOA. I also submitted a formal complaint to the sheriff's office with security cam footage of the two enforcers on my property. And just for good measure, I had my contacts in federal records run a check on the Ridgewood HOA's registration status. Spoiler, it wasn't active. The association had been disbanded 3 years earlier after a failed vote. No official board, no valid authority, but Karen, she'd never stopped. She'd kept the title, kept the letterhead, kept collecting fines. It was a fake operation run by one woman who thought she was queen of the block, and she wasn't done yet. That Monday, I got a thick envelope taped to my front door. Inside, a letter marked final notice, 2 citations, and 1 page stating I was now subject to community action enforcement. The last line, "Failure to comply may result in forced removal under Code 4.12H of Ridgewood Ordinance." I read it twice, then I laughed. Because that wasn't just fake, that was delusional. There is no code 4.12H. There is no enforcement clause in a non-existent HOA, and forced removal, that's eviction. She was trying to evict a U.S. Marshal from his own house using fake police, but the story didn't end there. Because the next day I got a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there they were again. The same two guys, this time wearing sunglasses with a third man standing behind them, clean-shaven, taller, and carrying a clipboard. "We're here on behalf of Ridgewood HOA enforcement," he said. "This is your final warning." I stepped outside. "You're back," I said. "Bold. You are in violation of Ridgewood residency compliance," he said. "You failed to respond to multiple notices. That's because they're fake. That's your interpretation," he said flatly. "We're here to detain you for failure to comply." He actually reached for a pair of cuffs. That's when I smiled, because they had no idea what was coming next. The second that guy reached for the cuffs, I knew they weren't just bluffing anymore. This wasn't a warning or intimidation. They were really about to try and arrest me on Karen's orders, with no legal authority whatsoever. "Sir, place your hands behind your back," the lead guy said, stepping forward with the cuffs like he was the real deal. I didn't move. Instead, I reached for my badge and held it up between us. "U.S. Marshal," I said calmly. "Back away now." The words hit them like a sledgehammer. The guy with the cuffs froze mid-step. The others exchanged quick glances, unsure of what to do. I've seen that look before in people who just realize they've crossed a line they can't walk back from. We were just following orders," one of them stammered. "And who exactly gave you those orders?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Silence. "Here's the deal," I continued. "You're on my property trying to detain a federal officer with no warrant, no authority, and no clue. That's impersonating law enforcement and attempted unlawful detainment. I can have you all in cuffs in 5 minutes. So unless you want to find out what that feels like, you'd better start talking." The leader blinked, his confidence evaporating. "It was Karen," he muttered. "She said she had legal grounds, that you were a threat to the neighborhood, that you'd been fined repeatedly and refused to cooperate. Karen's running a fake HOA with no jurisdiction, and now she's just dragged you into felony territory." I snapped a photo of all three of them, their cheap badges included, then pointed toward the street. "Get off my property, and if I see any of you here again, you'll be explaining yourselves in a federal holding cell." They didn't argue. They backed out like scared puppies and peeled off in the same white SUV that had shown up before. Once they were gone, I called the local PD and filed a full report. Then I forwarded the whole thing to the state attorney general's office. You don't mess around when someone tries to impersonate police, especially not in front of a U.S. Marshal and Karen. She just escalated this to a new level of stupid, but it got worse. That night, while reviewing my security camera footage, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At 2:36 a.m., a figure crept into my yard. Hoodie up, gloves on. He ducked under the side fence, pulled something from his bag, and walked toward my garage door. He wasn't there to drop off a citation. He was trying to plant something. I zoomed in and paused the frame. It was one of the HOA cops, trying to make it look like I was hiding contraband or violating local storage laws, so Karen could send more fines or call the police. That was the last straw. I didn't sleep that night. I was done playing defense. At 7 a.m. sharp, I made 3 calls. My federal contact at the U.S. Marshals Service Internal Threat Division, a detective I'd worked with on a trafficking case, now stationed in our state's Special Investigations Unit, and finally, the county district attorney. I laid it all out. Fake HOA. Fake enforcement officers. Unauthorized detainment attempts, tampering with private property, and a neighborhood being terrorized by a woman with a God complex and a clipboard. By noon, we had enough to open a full-scale investigation. Karen had no idea I just flipped the script. And the thing about investigations is, you let them think they're winning while the wall's close in, so I didn't confront her. I didn't storm her house or shout on the street. Instead, I watched and waited. That weekend, Karen hosted a community safety meeting at the neighborhood clubhouse. She handed out flyers with bold red lettering. "Keep Ridgewood safe, report non-compliant residents" underneath that, my house address. Listed as an example, she called me a threat to order and claimed I had refused all peaceful measures. She told neighbors I had a history of violence and that I might be armed and dangerous. I got calls from neighbors I'd barely spoken to, asking if the rumors were true. Karen was painting me as a ticking time bomb, and all of it, completely fabricated. But she didn't know I'd been recording. A few friendly residents attended the meeting on my behalf with hidden mics. I got the whole thing, her threats, her lies, and most importantly, her orders to keep monitoring my property and continue pressure tactics until I gave in. That was it. That was the final piece. I passed everything, recordings, surveillance footage, documents, to the state task force, and they didn't hesitate. They launched a full investigation into Karen's entire HOA operation. Turns out she'd been issuing fines to over 20 households, collecting payments through a private Venmo account, and none of it was registered, none of it legal. One neighbor paid over $2,400 in compliance fees over 3 years just to stop the harassment. Another family said Karen threatened to have their children removed for playing too loud. She wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a full-blown con artist with a grip on an entire community. The final nail came a week later. Karen posted a notice on the neighborhood bulletin board titled, "Mandatory Community Compliance Inspections, beginning Monday." She gave herself authority to enter any yard she deemed non-compliant. That crossed into criminal trespassing and unlawful surveillance. I gave the order. The task force moved in. But the story didn't end there, because just before the raid, something happened I didn't expect. So what happened? Well, before we dive in, if you're enjoying this story and love real-life HOA drama, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, uncover more wild stories, and bring you even crazier content. Your support means everything. It's what keeps this channel going strong. And trust me, there's plenty more chaos coming your way. Back to Karen. The stubborn Karen sent the fake HOA cops back, one last time. And this time, they weren't just there for me. They went after a woman 3 doors down, single mother, new to the neighborhood, claimed she owed fines for decorative violations, and threatened to report her for civil disobedience if she didn't pay on the spot. They tried to push their way into her home. Her 14-year-old son was the one who stopped them by slamming the door and calling 911. That call was the final domino. And what came next? Karen never saw it coming. By Monday morning, the entire operation was in place. The state investigators, county deputies, and a pair of federal agents from Internal Affairs were staged just outside the neighborhood. My team had surveillance footage, victim testimonies, financial records, and proof of impersonation. All they needed was the green light. And the incident with the single mother 3 doors down. That was it. She filed a police report. The moment the fake HOA enforcers tried to force entry into her home, they turned a civil issue into a criminal one. It was time, 8:03 a.m. I stood at my window, coffee in hand, watching. A black SUV rolled into the neighborhood, followed by 2 patrol cars and an unmarked unit. Karen had just stepped out of her house, still in her powder blue blazer, holding that same clipboard like it was a badge of honor. She didn't notice the agents until they were on her driveway. "Karen Whitlow," the lead agent called out. She turned, puzzled. "Yes, we have a warrant to search your home and property, as well as an arrest order for multiple counts of fraud, impersonation, and harassment." The moment those words hit, she dropped the clipboard. "What? This is insane. I'm the HOA president. I've kept this community safe. There is no HOA," the agent cut in coldly. "Not a legally recognized one. You've been impersonating authority and extorting residents." Karen tried to backpedal. "Wait, no, there's been a misunderstanding. I was voted in." "The board? There is no board," another agent said. "And we have financial records showing thousands collected in fake fines under your name." Her voice cracked. "This can't be happening." But it was. The cuffs clicked. The agents led her toward the SUV as neighbors began stepping out onto porches, watching the woman who had ruled their lives for years being taken away in disgrace. But we weren't done, because this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about the 2 clowns who tried to cuff me in front of my own house and impersonated federal authority, the fake HOA cops. They were still operating out of a tiny office Karen had set up 2 blocks away, in a converted garage filled with file cabinets, cheap uniforms, and stacks of printed citations. That's where the task force headed next. The sting was clean. The two men were inside, wearing their faux uniforms, eating breakfast like nothing was wrong. The moment the door opened, they were surrounded. One tried to run, didn't get far. The other froze when he saw two federal agents wearing real badges walk in. "You two are under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, attempted unlawful detainment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and multiple counts of harassment," one of the officers read aloud. "We didn't know," one of them pleaded. "Karen said she had legal backing. She told us this was real." Too late. They were cuffed and hauled out in front of half the block. It was over, but not for me, not yet. Later that afternoon, I walked down the street, finally free to breathe, knowing the weight of that fake authority was gone. Neighbors came out one by one. Brian was the first to approach me. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "I owe you, man," he said. "I thought I was crazy. I've been paying fines for years just to keep them off my back." "You're not crazy," I told him. "You were being conned, all of you were." More neighbors gathered. Some shook my hand. One woman even hugged me. They asked if I was really a U.S. Marshal. I nodded. "Why didn't you say anything?" someone asked. "Because sometimes it's better to let them show their true colors," I said. "You don't catch people like Karen by yelling on your front porch. You catch them with proof." But as calm settled over the neighborhood, a new problem emerged. People were mad, rightfully so. Thousands of dollars had been collected from innocent families. Karen had forged documents, printed citations, and even threatened people with property seizure. All of it fake, all of it unlawful. So what now? I didn't want to be the guy running the show. I'd already spent a career chasing people like Karen. I didn't want to become her replacement, but someone had to help clean up the mess. A few of us met that night in Brian's backyard, just 5 homeowners who wanted to fix things. We printed copies of the evidence, started organizing a refund list, and planned a neighborhood meeting. We weren't forming a new HOA. We were making sure nothing like this could ever happen again. No titles, no fake laws, just people looking out for each other. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. The morning after the arrests, I found an envelope taped to my door. Inside, one photo, me in my backyard, taken from the woods behind my house. No letter, no words. Just the image. Someone had been watching me, even after the arrests, even after Karen was in custody. This wasn't over, not yet. I showed the photo to the task force. They ran it through evidence. No prints, no trail. It wasn't from Karen's phone, not from her fake cops either. This came from someone else, someone still out there, someone who didn't like that I'd blown the whole thing wide open. So I did what I always do when things get murky. I went back to basics, ran the camera angle, tracked the timestamp, checked the surrounding properties. And that's when I found it, a private parcel of land behind my property, half an acre, owned by a shell company, one that Karen had been making payments to monthly. It was a fallback spot, a hidden office, and if I was right, it held everything she didn't want us to see. So I called the agents. We secured a warrant, and by the next day, we were standing outside an old rusted shed with a keypad lock and motion lights. They cracked the lock in under 2 minutes. Inside, stacks of documents, files on every house in the neighborhood. Handwritten logs of surveillance schedules, photos, bank transfers, and the smoking gun, video footage of Karen coaching the fake cops on how to issue threats without crossing legal lines. It was the motherlode, and the final proof that Karen hadn't just created a fake HOA. She'd built a full-on neighborhood extortion ring. But even that wasn't the most shocking part, because hidden in one of the folders was a list of properties she had flagged as next phase, properties outside our neighborhood. She had planned to expand, target other blocks, start new associations, copy the same scam, and use the same enforcers. Karen was a cancer, and she almost spread further. But now we had it all, and it was time to bury her scheme once and for all. The moment the search team finished cataloging everything from the hidden shed, the story took on a life of its own. We had surveillance logs, voice memos, fake enforcement training guides, and spreadsheets mapping out Karen's entire HOA scam, including future expansion zones in nearby neighborhoods. She wasn't just bluffing her way through some fake authority. She was building a criminal business model. And she almost got away with it. But now, everything she'd hidden was in the hands of people who knew exactly what to do with it. By the end of the week, the DA filed 12 formal charges against her: fraud, harassment, impersonation of law enforcement, extortion, trespassing, conspiracy. She wasn't getting bail this time. The judge saw the files, heard about the fake cops, saw the photo left on my door, and the moment he learned she'd been planning to expand her operation outside the neighborhood, he shut it all down. Karen was officially a flight risk. The neighborhood. It went from fear to fury. People wanted answers, wanted their money back, wanted justice. So we hosted a town hall, this time in the open. No closed doors, no clipboards, just neighbors, real ones, coming together to sort out the damage. Brian brought his projector. I printed out the screenshots and receipts. One woman made copies of every phony citation she'd ever received, and I stood at the front and showed everyone the truth. Karen's surveillance, the fake training notes for her enforcers, even the expansion map with pins and dollar signs next to property addresses. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Then a neighbor named Julia stood up. Karen fined me $400 last year for my son's skateboard ramp. She said it was a safety hazard. I paid it because she threatened to call child services. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned. I thought I was protecting my kid. I thought I did the right thing. Another man chimed in. She fined my mother-in-law $75 for hanging Christmas lights before Thanksgiving. Laughter broke out. Not because it was funny, but because we all realized how absurd it had gotten. The entire neighborhood had been under Karen's thumb for years, and nobody fought back. Until now. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. The task force combed through every fake fine Karen had ever issued. Over $68,000 in total. People who'd paid just to be left alone started lining up to file refund claims. And the moment the state confirmed her HOA had no legal authority, those payments were declared invalid. Refunds started coming in. Karen's personal assets were frozen. Her car, her savings, her so-called compliance center equipment. The court ruled that everything gained through fraudulent means would be liquidated to pay back victims. It wasn't a perfect fix. Some people would never see all their money again, but it was justice. One morning, I got a call from a local reporter. Word had spread, apparently, a story about a fake HOA, fraudulent cops, and one angry U.S. Marshal made for good headlines. She wanted an interview. I almost said no. But then I thought about it, about all the people Karen had scared into silence. And I realized this wasn't just about me anymore, so I gave the interview. I didn't mention names, didn't talk about tactics. I just told the truth. That if someone's threatening your peace, your property, or your rights, you don't roll over, you fight back, and you do it smart. That same week, I got a knock at my door. This time, it wasn't Karen's goons. It was someone from the state's Consumer Fraud Division. She was holding a folder with more documents and a small envelope. "We've wrapped the primary investigation," she said. "Thanks to your cooperation, the AG's office is pushing for maximum sentencing. And here's a formal commendation." I raised an eyebrow. "A commendation," she smiled. "You didn't just expose a scam, you protected people who didn't know how to fight." I opened the envelope. A small certificate, nothing flashy, but it meant something. I nodded. "Appreciate it." "Also," she added, Karen finally broke. I blinked. She confessed everything. The fake cops, the training, the false fines, even the attempt to plant evidence on your property. She handed me a sealed transcript. "You might want to read that." I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip low, reading Karen's written confession. It was pathetic, page after page of excuses. I was only trying to maintain order. People stopped following the rules. I needed to take charge. Nowhere did she take real accountability, but buried in the last page she mentioned me. I didn't know who he was. If I had known, I never would have escalated. There it was. Proof that her entire scam had hinged on fear and assumption. And the moment she ran into someone who didn't play along, her world collapsed. But the story didn't end there. Because while Karen sat behind bars, the community started to heal. The neighborhood formed a volunteer watch, not to police people, but to look out for each other. No fines, no citations, just neighbors helping neighbors. Brian started a weekend BBQ rotation. Julia's son rebuilt his ramp, with help from 5 dads on the block. The single mom 3 doors down. She joined a local parent group, and me. I finally planted the garden I'd been putting off, right where Karen's fake cop tried to plant evidence. I put a small sign in front of it, nothing dramatic, just 3 words, "No more fear." And just when I thought it was over, Something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. No return address, just my name inside a photo. Karen sitting in a courtroom, wrists cuffed, expression blank. And a sticky note handwritten. Looks like she finally met someone she couldn't intimidate. No name, no signature. But I had a feeling I knew who sent it, one of the neighbors, a former enforcer who felt guilty. Didn't matter. What mattered was this: the fear was gone. The control was broken, and the community was finally ours again. Karen's trial was scheduled 2 months after her arrest, but in the meantime, the neighborhood was unrecognizable, in the best possible way. It was like someone flipped a switch. The fear that used to creep under every front door was gone. Neighbors started talking again, smiling, hosting garage sales, helping with yard work, watching each other's pets. The thing about fear is it spreads fast, but once it's gone, so does the control that came with it. Karen had been the center of her own storm for years, and now that the storm had passed, people were finally rebuilding. The trial itself wasn't much of a spectacle. Karen sat in silence most of the time, surrounded by piles of evidence and a team of lawyers who looked like they were carrying a sinking ship. There was no jury to convince. She opted for a bench trial, probably hoping a judge would go easier on her. He didn't. The charges stuck, every single one. Fraud, impersonation, unlawful detainment through hired security, misuse of funds, and even attempted coercion of law enforcement. The planted evidence stunt that sealed the deal. The judge called her actions an organized abuse of power, designed to exploit and intimidate a community for personal gain. Karen was sentenced to 6 years, no parole for at least 4, no more clipboards, no more fake laws, no more Karen. I didn't attend sentencing day in person. I didn't need to. I'd already watched her lose the only thing she cared about, control. Instead, I stayed home and grilled burgers with Brian and Julia. Kids splashed in Julia's now legal backyard pool, and neighbors filled the sidewalk with lawn chairs and coolers. People laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. It didn't take long before someone raised a drink and yelled, "To the Marshal!" I rolled my eyes, but I smiled. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done. But still, hearing that, seeing these people free again, it hit different later that night. As the sun dipped low and most folks wandered home, I found myself sitting on my porch again. Same spot where I used to watch Karen's fake cops patrol like they were hunting criminals. Now, all I could hear was laughter echoing from down the block. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the state task force. Subject line: Karen Whitlow, case closed. Attached was a summary of the entire investigation, a breakdown of financial restitution, and a short message: "Thank you for your cooperation. Your actions directly protected over 40 families from continued fraud. We consider this case fully resolved." I leaned back and exhaled. Resolved. That word meant more to me than I thought. I'd spent most of my life tracking fugitives, recovering witnesses, escorting prisoners across state lines. I've kicked down doors in 3 countries, but this was different. Because this wasn't just about catching a criminal. This was about protecting people who didn't know they could fight back. The next morning, I found something unexpected, an envelope on my doorstep. No name, no address, just a single note inside, typed on plain white paper. I thought I was doing the right thing. I really did. I thought I was keeping things clean, organized, safe. But you showed everyone what I really was. Congratulations. Kay, there was no signature, but I didn't need one. I tucked it into a drawer, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what happens when no one challenges power. The neighborhood kept growing stronger. We set up a community group, not an HOA. No fines, no rules about trash bins or paint colors. Just a group chat, a shared lawnmower, and a rotating schedule of BBQs and kids' movie nights. Brian's garage became the unofficial hangout spot. Julia's son started teaching younger kids how to skateboard, on the same ramp Karen once fined them for, the single mom down the block. She now leads the local parent patrol group, making sure kids get to and from school safely, and me. I went back to my quiet routines, lawn care, morning walks, coffee on the porch, exactly what I wanted from the beginning. Then one day, something strange happened. A moving truck pulled into Karen's old driveway. I watched as a new couple stepped out, early 30s, 2 toddlers, bright eyes and excited energy. You could tell they had no idea what kind of history they'd just inherited. A few neighbors went over to welcome them. I waited until they settled in before walking over with a box of cookies and a short piece of advice. "Welcome to Ridgewood," I said. "This is a great neighborhood. Just one rule, don't let anyone tell you how to live." The man laughed. "That's fair. I heard there used to be a nightmare HOA here." "Used to be," I said with a smile. "Not anymore." About a week later, I walked past Karen's old garden, overgrown now. Dead leaves, faded flowers. I stopped for a second, not to gloat, not to celebrate, just to take it in. Because that garden used to be a symbol of fear. She used it to judge every other yard on the block. Held it up like some kind of golden standard. Now, it was just weeds and memories. I turned and walked home, peaceful, unbothered. You know, they say power corrupts. But in my experience, it's not power. It's unchecked power. Karen wasn't dangerous because she had authority. She was dangerous because no one ever asked who gave it to her. So if there's one thing I want anyone to remember from this story, it's this. Don't assume someone has authority just because they act like they do. Ask questions. Check the facts. Know your rights. Because the second you give someone unearned control over your life, you start losing pieces of it, and you won't even realize it's happening. Karen tried to use fake cops, made up rules and fear to run a neighborhood like a dictatorship. And she would have kept going too if she hadn't picked a fight with the wrong guy. Because what she didn't know, I'm a U.S. Marshal, and I don't get intimidated.